You are an intelligent person. You are a logical person. You are a competent person. You are a person of a high IQ. You are a person who can never fail. That's just a fact of your person, a fact of the world, really. Should you to take an examination, you would receive high marks because you would answer everything, or almost everything, correctly. You remember all you've learned, you will remember all you've learned, and all that you have not learned you have learned, and when the time comes to use all you've learned, you will have remembered it enough to use it, be it in an examination or somewhere else. You are an intelligent and eloquent person. You have a solid grasp of language, convention, reading comprehension, its rules, its words, and its structure. You know many words and their meanings, you have a wide vocabulary. You know many idioms, even foreign words and phrases. You easily understand analogies, and just as easily comprehend the things you read. You are proficient in noticing errors in grammar, as your understanding of both informal and formal grammar is doubly thorough as it is intuitive. You are aware of how a sentence or a paragraph should be organized, and thus, are able to revise and reorganize them yourself. You are aware of, and fully remember the rules of language. Its parts and component parts. You are aware of it all. You are proficient in the English language, your native language, and any other language that may be included in your examinations. Your knowledge of language, and its rules, parts, and structure, is exhaustive, thorough, and intuitive. All known, noticed, memorized. You are hyper-aware of the topic of language and reading comprehension, in all of the aforementioned, and in all of the not, especially but not only in its mistakes. Thus, if you were to make a mistake, you would know so instantly, and instantly be able to rectify it. If you were to notice a mistake, you would know just as quickly, and be able to point it out or rectify it just as quickly. You are an intelligent and logical person. You have a solid grasp of premises and conclusions, of structure, of assumptions, of the arguments and the kinds of arguments, of the validity and invalidity of those arguments, of what is sound and unsound, of the deductive and the inductive, of the weak and the strong, of principles, of functions and paradoxes, of truth, of falsehood, of uncertainty, of syllogisms, of propositions of the categorical nature, of the condition, of the inferred, and worst of all, of the fallacious. You have a grand sense of pattern recognition. You are able to mentally diagram propositions into the proper forms. You understand the like parts and unlike parts of things, the rules and the not. Of contradictories, contraries, subcontraries, and subalterns. Of conversion, obversion, proposition, and contraposition. Of consequence, antecedents, and condition. Of conjunction, of disjunction, of equivalence. Of tautology, implication, exportation, double negation, transposition, and the like. Of the minor, the major, the middle. Of the all, the some, and the none. You notice it all. You remember it all. Each part of logic, each rule of inference, each theorem. You notice the odd thing out as if nothing were more obvious. You notice the pattern, the similarities, the analogy, the causation, the correlation, the signs, the statistics, the strength and other generalizations. You notice what you know, and you know what you notice. You notice the what, the who, the where, the when, the how, and the why. You notice the error, the mistake, the fallacy, both informal and formal. You are aware of all reasoning that is faulty, of conclusions that are reached for reasons poor. In fact, you could name each fallacy, even in their Latin convention. They're just so obvious to you that you can name and remember them so easily. You are proficient in verbal tests of logic, in numerical tests of logic, and in visuospatial tests of logic. In analogies, in missing letters or missing words. In deviance from the identified, or identifiable patterns. In plug-in logic. In alphabet problems. In numerical problems. In numerical analogy. In verbal analogy. In visuospatial analogy. In patterned logic. In shape matching. In shape rotation. In cubic, or sided view. In shape combination. In shape construction and deconstruction. In symmetry. In deviance from the visuospatial pattern. In details difference. In details missing. In details identified. You can remember the entire alphabet, forwards and backwards, without having to sing it even. Your knowledge of logic, and its rules, parts, and structure, is exhaustive, thorough, and intuitive. All known, noticed, memorized. You are hyper-aware of the topic of logic in all of the aforementioned, and in all of the not, especially but not only in its mistakes. Thus, if you were to make a mistake, you would know so instantly, and instantly be able to rectify it. If you were to notice a mistake, you would know just as quickly, and be able to point it out or rectify it just as quickly. You are an intelligent and mathematical person. You have a solid grasp of mathematics. You have a grand sense of pattern recognition, of its rules, of its concepts, of its equations, of each and every formula, of arithmetic, of algebra, of geometry, of trigonometry, of statistics, of sequence, of the types of sequence, of data and data interpretation, of word problems, and word problem organization, of translation, of basic operations, of complex operations, of the properties of addition, of the properties of multiplication, of odd and even, of whole, complex, rational, and irrational, of the real and the not, of integers, of division and its divisibility rules, of the prime and the composite, of exponents, of degrees, of PEMDAS or GEMDAS, of the GCF and the LCM, of the rational, the fractions, and its rules, of the laws of exponents, of the laws of radicals, of radical expression, of the power of an imaginary unit, of squares and perfect squares, of scientific notation, of conversion, of percentage form, of decimal form, of ratio and proportion, of rational or negative exponents, of discount, of base, percent, and rate, of factoring, of mean, median, mode, of the average, of weighted terms, of the weighted average, of work and work problems, of range, of domain and range, which is different, of value, of missing terms, of the nth term, of variables and coefficients, of like terms and unlike terms, of factorials, of combination and permutation, of keywords, of numerical analogies, of sets and set theory, of relationships between variables, both the direct and the inverse, of intervals, of the consecutive, of distance, time, and rate, of cost, of interest, of compound interest, of missing details, the things we need, or need to look for, of probability, of simple and complex probability, of geometry, of polygons, of sides and edges, of angles, of vertices, of line segments, and diagonals, of interior angles and exterior angles, of the regular and the irregular, of the convex, concave, simple, and complex, of the Platonic solids, of sum and difference, of the acute, the right, and the obtuse, of the Pythagorean theorem, of Pythagorean triples, like 3, 4, 5, or 5, 12, 13, or 8, 15, 17, or 7, 24, 25. Of the isosceles, of the scalene, of the circle, the center, the radius, and the diameter. Of the quadrilateral, and the types of quadrilateral. Of the lines and angles. Of the transversal and the parallel. Of the corresponding and the alternate. Of the consecutive and complementary. Of the congruent and the supplementary. Of the formulas and the formulas again. Of the different formulas for perimeter and area. Of diameter, circumference, and area. Of volume, lateral surface area, and total surface area. Of geometry in all its parts. Of coordinate geometry. Of quadrants and coordinates. Of the conic sections. Of relations. Of functions. Of linear equations. Of the general form and the standard form. Of solution sets and arriving at solution sets. Of quadratic equations. Of completing the squares. Of the quadratic formula. Of the nature of the roots. Of the real and distinct. Of the real and the equal. Of the conjugate and the imaginary. Of the double roots. Of the roots of multiplicity 2. Of the real and rational roots. Of the real and irrational conjugate roots. Of the sums and products of roots. Of synthetic division. Of long division. Of remainder theorem. Of factor theorem. of rational roots theorem, of complex conjugate roots theorem, of rational equations, of the domain of rational equations, or other equations, of extraneous solutions, of LCDs and LCMs, of zero fractions, of cross multiplication, of radical equations, of the domain of radical equations, or other equations, of solving equations, of absolute values, and absolute value equations, of case methods, of critical numbers, of interval methods, of exponential equations, of logarithms, of logarithmic equations, of the laws of logarithms, of the properties of logarithms, of natural logarithms, of base e, of base 10, of inequalities, of algebraic inequalities, of set notation, of interval notation, of chain notation, of the bound and the unbound, of the open and the closed, of the included and the excluded, of trichotomy property, of linear inequalities, of chained inequalities, of polynomial inequalities, of strict inequalities, of non-strict inequalities, of the critical point method, of rational inequalities, of numerators and denominators, of absolute value inequalities, of the origin, of the abscissa, of the ordinate, of the length of a segment formula, of the midpoint of a segment formula, of the slope of a segment, of the x-intercept and the y-intercept, of the standard form for linear equations, of the slope-intercept form, of the point-slope form, of the two-point form, of the two-intercept form, of parallel lines, of perpendicular lines, of systems of equations, of the inconsistent, the consistent dependent, and the consistent independent, of graphing, of solving, of eliminating by addition, of substitution, of solving nonlinear systems, of the circle and its equation, of the parabola, and its shape, equations, orientation, formula, and parts, of the ellipse, and its shape, equations, orientation, formula, and parts, of the hyperbola, and its shape, equations, orientation, formula, and parts, of its axes, of its foci, of focal distance, of asymptotes, of vertices, of co-vertices, of the center, of the major axis, of the minor axis, of the transverse axis, of the conjugate axis, of the semi-major axis, of the semi-minor axis, of the directrix, kf the latus rectum, of the equations that are for a specific type of conic section, of graphing logic and its rules, of evaluating an equation, shape, or function, of evaluating anything mathematical, of odd and even functions, of the fundamental operations on functions, of the addition-subtraction of functions, of the multiplication-division of functions, of the composition of functions, of intercepts, x and y, of sequences and series, of the arithmetic and geometric, of the linear, quadratic, and polynomial functions, of the domains and range, of their formulas and other like equations, of their parts and graphs, of their reflection, of their scale, of their translatability, of their x-axis, of their y-axis, of their origin, scale, and translatability, of Descartes' rule of signs, of positive real zeros, of negative real zeros, of alternating signs, of degrees, of coefficients and leading coefficients, of rational functions, of vertical asymptotes, of horizontal asymptotes, of oblique asymptotes, of the whole, of the x and y intercepts, of the cases in which values are values, and asymptotes are asymptotes, of radical functions, of square root functions, of vertex forms, of greater than, lesser than, and equal tos, of exponential, logarithmic, and inverse functions, of increasing and decreasing functions, when and why, of piecewise functions, of absolute value functions, of greatest integer functions, of least integer functions, of signum functions, of other special functions, of evaluating functions, of translating words to expressions and equations, of GRESA, of solving math word problems, of ratio, proportion, and variation, of direct, inverse, and partitive proportion, and direct, inverse, and joint variation, of business math and its problems and solutions, of markup and markup rate, of commission, of simple interest and compound interest, of number, digit, age, and geometry problems, of general formulas, of angular logic, of mathematical logic, of present, future, past, of mixture problems, of money, wage, and investiture, of work and rate, and other work problems, of distance and motion, of meeting and overtaking, of current or wind speed involvement, of distance or time involvement, of dimensions, of trajectory, of maximum and minimum problems and values, of rewriting problems, of rewriting equations, of using functions as models, of using formulas, of evaluating problems, of points and lines and planes, of mathematical definitions, of sets and subsets, of segments, of congruency, of postulates and axioms, of corollaries and converses, of angles and angle logic, of sides and vertices, of Euclidean logic, formulas, and geometry, of degrees and radians, of pi, of complementary angles, of supplementary angles, of opposite angles, of adjacent angles, of linear pairs, of vertical angles, of geometric and trigonometric theorems, of intersecting lines, of parallels and perpendicular lines, of distance and equidistance, of skew lines, of coplanar and non-coplanar, of the transversal, of the distinct, of concurrency, of exterior angles on the same side of the transversal, of alternate interior angles, angles which are at opposite sides of the transversal but contained within the interior region between coplanar lines, of alternate exterior angles, angles which are at opposite sides of the transversal but found in the exterior region beyond the coplanar lines, of corresponding angles, angles which are on the same side of the transversal but on different regions of the coplanar lines, of interior angles of the same side, of angular theorems, where alternate interior and exterior angles are congruent, where corresponding angles are congruent, and where interior and exterior angles of the same side are supplementary, of triangles and their altitude, median, and bisectors, be it angular or perpendicular, of concurrence theorem, of isosceles triangle theorem, of exterior angle theorem, of triangle inequality theorem, of triangle similarity, of corresponding angles being congruent, of corresponding sides being proportional, of similarity theorems, of proportionality theorems, of miscellaneous theorems, of the midline theorem, of triangle congruence, of other theorems, of congruence postulates and theorems, of right triangles, of Pythagorean triples, of special right triangles, of quadrilaterals and polygons, of naming convention, of parts, structure, type, and terminology, of circles, of chords and central angles, of inscribed angles, of diameters and arcs, minor, major, and semicircular, of concentricity, of congruency, of tangentiality, of a secant of a circle, of every tangent to a circle being perpendicular to the radius drawn to the point of contact, of the perpendicular from the center of the circle to a chord bisecting the chord, of the opposite angles of an inscribed quadrilateral being supplementary, of common internal tangents, and common external tangents, of power theorem, of intercepted arcs, of consequent angles, of a plus b over 2, of a times b equals c times d, of a minus b over 2, of a squared equals c times parenthesis c plus d, of a times parenthesis a plus b equals c times parenthesis c plus d, of perimeter and perimeter formulas, of area and area formulas, of surface area and surface area formulas, of voluma and formulas, of all pertinent mathematical formulae, of trigonometry, of 180 degrees being equal to pi radians, in the conversion factor, of directed and undirected angles, of naming convention, of quadrantal angles, of initial and terminal sides, of coterminal angles, of reference angles, of the unit circle and all its parts, of the trigonometric ratios, of sine, cosine, tangent, of secant, cosecant, and cotangent, of SOH-CAH-TOA and CHO-SHA-KOW, of the trigonometric values of each and every special angle, of reciprocal identities, of quotient identities, of Pythagorean identities, of angle addition identities, of double angle identities, of half angle identities, of trigonometric equations and their solutions, of statistics, of the population and the sample, of the measures of central tendency, of mean, weighted mean, median, and mode, of the measures of variability, of range and variance, of standard deviation, of the index, of the variance, of measures of position, of z-score, of PTH percentile, PTH quartile, PTH decile, and many more, of combinatorics, of permutation, both distinguishable and cyclic, and combination, of probability, of limits and derivatives, of basic limits and the properties of limits, of the scalar multiple, of sum or difference, of product, quotient, power, and radical properties, of factoring, of rationalizing, of one-sided limits, from the left or the right, of jump discontinuity, of removable discontinuity, of the limit not existing, of an infinite limit, of limits at infinity, of derivatives, of differentiation and its rules, of the constant rule, of the power rule, of the constant multiple rule, of the sum and difference rules, of the product rule, of the quotient rule, of the chain rule, of the low d high and the high d low all over low squared, of the left derivative right and the right derivative left, of all math. Your knowledge of mathematics, and its rules, parts, and structure, is exhaustive, thorough, and intuitive. All known, noticed, memorized. You are hyper-aware of the topic of mathematics in all of the aforementioned, and in all of the not, especially but not only in its mistakes. Thus, if you were to make a mistake, you would know so instantly, and instantly be able to rectify it. If you were to notice a mistake, you would know just as quickly, and be able to point it out or rectify it just as quickly. You are an intelligent and generally knowledgeable person. You have a solid grasp of world history, of national history, of continental history, of current events, of geopolitics, of politics and government, of geography, science, philosophy, of art, music, and literature, of sports, movies, celebrities, and pop culture. Of all trivia, of world trivia. Your knowledge of general knowledge, and its standard, niche, and obscure parts, is exhaustive, thorough, and intuitive. All known, noticed, memorized. You are hyper-aware of the topic of general knowledge, in all of the aforementioned, and in all of the not, especially but not only in its mistakes. Thus, if you were to make a mistake, you would know so instantly, and instantly be able to rectify it. If you were to notice a mistake, you would know just as quickly, and be able to point it out or rectify it just as quickly.